The case just started, but I think the first week gave results that were surprising even for us who have been watching this case since the beginning. I think it brought much more specific results and concreteness than I would have expected in the first week. It gave a preview of what evidence the joint investigation team has gathered. And it came with very strong words of warning to Russia to not meddle anymore, if at all this is a realistic warning. But I think it came with a lot more power and concreteness than expected by anybody. We did not know anything about the protected witnesses. And I think it's very good that we don't know about it, because it means that despite all of our efforts in trying to find out everything we could about the ongoing of the investigation, we had no idea that the joint investigation team had actually secured tens of witnesses, some of whom actually came from the volunteers or the mercenaries of the Russian citizens who were in East Ukraine, and whom have decided to speak to the prosecution, triggered by conscience or by the calls for witnesses by the joint investigation team. So these specific witnesses that were mentioned were completely new to us, and we find that very interesting and optimistic. Russia cannot influence the course of the trial, and it lost its hope to do that quite a few years ago. I think Russia's current strategy is to try to delegitimize the outcome of the trial as much as possible. And that would not be successful. That would not be easily achievable for the, let's say, for the political establishment of the world, but they can do it for at least the useful idiots that are looking for anything that they can grab on to have a sort of anti-establishment narrative. And I think they might be able to do it also for some less transparent governments. Maybe Malaysia will ultimately decide to come up with a non-binding endorsement of the outcome of the case. I know that Russia has tried over the last few years to establish a sort of a back channel with Malaysia and try to essentially bribe the government and political leaders of Malaysia to take a position that would delegitimize the outcome of the court case. But in terms of influencing the actual legal court case, there's no way for Russia to do anything about it. I think what Russia may not be aware of is how independent the court system in the Netherlands is. It's independent of the government. It's completely, the judges could care less about what the government thinks. And there are many cases when individuals or companies, and including a company that I ran in the Netherlands, have sued the government and won multi-million and billion court cases against the government. So the Dutch court is extremely independent, is extremely professional, and there's absolutely no way they will be brought into a situation where they would just misplace evidence or believe propaganda versus hard facts. Well, the implications are clear. Yesterday, in the second day of test of presenting the case, the joint investigation team actually quoted its own findings that confirmed the very close involvement of FSB and GRU in activities in eastern Ukraine. This has never been said publicly by an actual investigative body in a European investigative body before. It was a preview of what's to come, and in the next 2 years there will be hard evidence played on video in the courtroom and phone calls played out in audio in the courtroom that will prove, because that's part of the whole case of investigating the chain of command of who allowed for MH17 to be shot down, will prove the actual involvement on the ground of Russian secret services and military in eastern Ukraine. And there's no way that this will not have a major implication on the rest of the world, because while now Russia can say, well, nobody's proven that, and yeah, we don't believe journalists and Bellingcat investigators, this will be the first time that an actual investigative body with a court judgment will actually set the facts straight, and the facts will include the facts of involvement of Russian military and secret services in eastern Ukraine. Well, we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. I think we're in the early days of government response across Europe to the coronavirus pandemic. We cannot predict what the impact may be on the court hearings. But the court hearings themselves will continue in any case. They may just not allow the audience to sit in the courtroom, and everybody will be forced to watch via live stream, like I did because I was in quarantine. So I don't think the schedule of the court hearing will suffer, but the way it is done may be completely different this year. Justice delayed is justice not only denied but forgotten, and I think the Dutch court is extremely conscious of the pain that the families of the victims are still going through, and I think that's the primary driver that will make the judges decide to not allow spurious requests for delays. Typically, in any sort of criminal case, there's a lot of little tricks that the defense is doing to cause a delay as much as possible. And I think it was clear from the first 2 days that the court is not going to allow that. So I don't think it will stretch to 4 to 5 years. I do think it will be about 2 years and no less than that. But 2 years is enough to keep the fire burning and to keep global media focused on this. If it goes anywhere beyond that, then I agree with you. It could be a bit risky for people to forget this most important court case of the last few years, of the last decades. I think given the hard evidence that will be presented in court of the Russian direct involvement in the downing, the only thing that the defense for Mr. Polatov may try to argue is that he was not critical or crucial in the chain of command, and he was just a low-level volunteer who was doing what he was asked to do without understanding the gravity of his actions. So I think it's going to be a mitigating strategy as opposed to a strategy of trying to prove that Russia didn't shoot down MH17 and that he had no role in it. They are unlikely to go for somebody that is not within the reach of being arrested or brought to justice if he's going to be at the same level or lower than the level of in the chain of command than the 4 defendants that already are serving or are going to be served justice. So I believe that the next suspects are going to be of a higher level in the chain of command. I think there will be military, and I think there will be Secret Service officers. And ultimately, I do believe that the chain of command of indictments will go to somebody at the political level, be that a deputy minister or the head of the southern region of the military command of Russia, or maybe even the minister. But there's no way that the way the Dutch legal system works, they have to get to the person who is responsible, who authorized the delivery of the book and the use of the book. And it's clear from now that this cannot be the people on the ground. It was somebody from Moscow, from Russia. So I don't think there will be Cemak will be brought as a suspect unless he suddenly ends up being rearrested by the SBU. And if that happens, then I do think he might be brought as an indicted person. But if he remains outside the reach of law enforcement or in Russia, then he's not going to be brought in, nor with anybody else of a low level. Well, my estimate is that there will be at least 2 or 3 in the mid-level chain of command, such as generals that were probably in retirement but were allocated to curate the separatists and the militants. And this will be the second wave. And then I expect there will be a third wave as well of somebody of the type of the head of the Southern Military Command Unit in Rostov, or maybe even Surkov or Malofeev, who knows? So I think in total, probably another 6 to 8 defendants I expect to be brought in front of the court. In this criminal case, the only party that can be indicted to pay and forced to pay are the suspects. I think it's more of a symbolic opportunity for people to claim damages in this process, but it cannot be the Russian state. However, it is important for people to claim their stake here and to present in front of the court the reasons why they're damaged, why they believe they are owed damages, because the findings of this court which will be very detailed and exclusive, because only the Joint Investigation Team has received access to a lot of the evidence, and the relatives don't have access to that evidence. But the findings of this court can be automatically used in the court of the relatives that is ongoing against the Russian state at the European Court of Justice of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and also in separate cases that are led by other relatives in the United States, for example, against the Russian state. So it's an important step for the relatives to now claim their stake here in terms of damages, but they cannot really collect it from Girkin or from Dumbinsky. But the facts that will be claimed here will be automatically reused in the European Court of Human Rights and in other civil litigation by the families against the Russian state. And then the Russian state will be on the hook. And it's an enforceable hook because the Russian state owes a lot of property around the world. It owes airplanes, and any country that decides to go after the enforcement of the claim of relatives will be able to just confiscate property. And that's going to be how the relatives can actually get their money back, or to get the money they're owed. There is a court case in the European Court of Human Rights, and that court case is going slowly because it needs to allow for the findings from the criminal case to be incorporated into that court case. So there's no question this will happen. The only question is, will Russia, in the meantime, decide that everything it's doing is too damaging for it long term and try to prevent, let's say, the second or the third wave of indictments that will be very sensitive from a political fallout point of view, because the moment it is proven in front of the court that the Russian military was directly involved, and that becomes part of the court file, then a lot of governments will be forced to take a new wave of sanctions against Russia. So I think my prediction is that at some point before the end of the case and before the third wave of indictments, the Russian government will probably decide to come to a compromise and to say, yeah, well, sorry, yeah, it was a Russian book, but the government was not responsible. It was some rogue officers, and oh, by the way, they died already in Syria. So too bad, but we acknowledge the responsibility of making that mistake and making that possible, but we don't acknowledge that we authorize that, and we're going to pay the families. So I expect that will be a cheaper result for Russia than the 20 years that they face of being a pariah state if they don't acknowledge the outcome and the findings. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 2 years we see a partial recognition by Russia.